Thank you very much, Hilmar, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Thailand for this wonderful welcome this morning. My name is Michael Kingston, and I'm here in my role as a consultant working with the Maritime Safety Division of the International Maritime Organization on fishing vessel safety and illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, as well as polar issues. And I've been working on the steering committee organised by the IMO Secretariat to help drive the implementation of the Cape Town Agreement, and the steering committee was established at the beginning of 2019. And with that in mind, can I sincerely, on behalf of IMO, thank all the organisers for convening this important fish platform conference, a very timely one here in Asia, and the theme of Fisher's Life, a Fisher's Future is really what this is all about at the end of the day. And it's a huge honour for me to be part of this session and to follow someone who, remarkably, I have not yet met, but have deeply admired from afar, Father Bruno Ciceri, and the previous speakers also, for their great insight into the provisions of the Cape Town Agreement C188 and STCWF. I do not propose to go over the progress and proposed work in relation to STCWF, as in fact Koki Matsushima is far better placed than me as chair of the working group, and he has excellently explained future plans for STCWF. I will concentrate on the Cape Town Agreement, and I will not go into any depth in relation to its provisions, given the great insight and explanation we have heard from Nigel Blaisby. What I will do is explain what the IMO Secretariat, in conjunction with others, have been doing and continue to do to try and get the Convention implemented once and for all. And that also includes how we have highlighted the benefits of its implementation in the past few years to try and force it up the political agenda. So first of all, what is the current status of the Cape Town Agreement? Where have we arrived at after all these years? And I appreciate Nigel has referenced some of the history, but a quick overview of the statistics to put the current position in context is important, I think. As we know, the journey started in 1977 with the Torremolinos Convention. However, it did not enter into force. In response, the 1993 Torremolinos Protocol was brought about. However, that too never entered into force due to technical and legal difficulties. The Torremolinos Convention required 15 states to ratify, with an aggregate number of fleet not less than 50% of the world's fishing vessels of 24 metres in length and over. And unfortunately, many states with large fleets had difficulties in implementing its provisions. Only 4 states ratified it. The entry into force criteria of the 1993 protocol required 15 ratifications, with an aggregate 14,000 fishing vessels of 24 metres and above. Although 17 member states met the criteria at the time for the number of ratifications, the aggregate number of fishing vessels could only meet 23% of the criteria, with 3,237 vessels. This list shows the states that ratified the protocol. In response, the 2012 Cape Town Agreement was adopted. For the entry into force of the agreement, it requires 22 ratifications with an aggregate of 3,600 fishing vessels of 24 metres in length and above, operating on the high seas. As of today, the total number of member states that have ratified the agreement, as Nigel said, has reached 17, corresponding to 77% of the required number and 1,925 vessels, which is 53% of the requirement. Although the entry into force criteria has not been yet met, the news is positive, and we need to reflect on where we were just a few years ago and some of the current developments, which are hugely encouraging. And as I mentioned at the outset, there is much work going on in a concerted effort by IMO and others that is producing dividends, and we are close to achieving the Convention's entry into force. And it's my job here today to highlight this and to encourage support for the final push. IMO is acutely aware that its mandate includes fishing vessel safety. The IMO Secretariat and Secretary General Lim consider it completely unacceptable that we have rafts of regulation for merchant vessels, and yet the cornerstone Fishing Vessel Safety Convention has been lying on government shelves since 1977. Dr. Heike Degum, the director of the Maritime Safety Division, comes from a fishing background in East Germany. Her brother is a fisherman. So a plan of action was put in place to get this over the line. A steering committee was established with the support of Pew Charitable Trusts, FAO, ILO and Spain in order to encourage the entry into force of the agreement, and a ministerial conference was held in October 2019 in Torremolinos, Spain, with quite a large participation. A declaration was signed by 51 states committing themselves to ratifying the agreement by the 10th anniversary of its adoption, which was the 11th of October 2022. This is the list of member states that have ratified the agreement, as I said, 17. What it does not show is where we started at the beginning of 2019, when we only had 10 states and approximately 1,000 vessels. And although the 11th of October deadline for those who signed the Torremolinos Declaration in 2019 has just passed, we must remember that COVID-19 intervened, which was a genuine priority for administrations. Just last week, we have been informed that Japan have got the legislation through their parliament, which will take us to 18 states. South Korea are also in the process, as are New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Venezuela, Poland and Portugal. And it's extremely significant that the leadership on this issue is now spreading across the world, here in Asia, in Latin America, in the Southern Hemisphere and in Europe. In order to maintain momentum during COVID-19, IMO, supported by Pew Charitable Trusts and governments in various regions around the world, held regional webinars to encourage ratification, which has helped to produce the current momentum and recent ratifications. We canvassed, with the support of Croatia, for the CTA to be at the top of the agenda at a ministerial conference in Opaja in March 2020. And we were lucky it went ahead and lucky to get back. It was the last IMO mission before COVID-19. And it produced results. 3 further states signed the Torremolinos Declaration: Poland, Portugal and Bulgaria, and later in the year, Croatia ratified. And I'm still in touch with this Polish minister, and I can assure you I didn't force him to sign the agreement, although it looks a bit like that in the photo. But he knows what he has to do, and the process is about to be completed in Poland. As the IMO received observer status of the Arctic Council in 2019, we also used that platform to initiate a project in the protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, co-led by Iceland and Spain, to raise awareness of the Cape Town Agreement. I do not have time to go into the details, but essentially this asks all 8 Arctic states and the 13 observer states to look at their domestic legislation and fill out a template that we prepared to explain what CTA provisions they already have and how they are moving towards the implementation of the Cape Town Agreement. And if anyone wants further details, please ask me or look at PAIM's website where the project is explained in full. In this slide, you can see the Arctic states and the Arctic Council observers that have ratified, and those who are observers that signed the declaration. You get the drift. This all creates more pressure to do the right thing. Additionally, only 2 weeks ago at IMO, and again with great leadership by the Nautical Institute, in co-sponsoring a Polar Regions seminar, there was a dedicated Cape Town Agreement session highlighted by Dr. Heike Degum in her opening of the seminar as an incredibly important issue. And all the while, IMO's Cape Town Agreement team have been offering bilateral support to states. 5 bilateral online meetings took place during the pandemic and several more recently. And interagency cooperation is ongoing among the FAO, ILO and IMO, in particular in the field of combating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. The 5th session of their joint working group is planned for next year, and also various IMO resolutions have been passed on a continuous basis to keep the pressure up, with Secretary General Lim frequently advocating the position. And under the coordination of Spain, a group of interested delegations established a platform to develop draft guidance on the implementation of the agreement for the use of competent authorities. And this group includes Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The work was reported to MSC 106 last week, with overwhelming support of this work expressed by Netherlands, Germany, Panama, France, Poland, Belgium, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, Angola, United Arab Emirates, South Africa, Nigeria, Denmark, Portugal, Thailand, Pew Charitable Trusts, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Somalia, and Vanuatu. And the guidelines which I'm working on with Iceland will be presented in a paper to the III Committee next year in July. I mentioned earlier about highlighting the benefits of ratifying the Cape Town Agreement. There is no better way to do this than to ask a nation that has acted, and in my mind, as I stated in the Polar Seminar, with a moral compass. And I've borrowed some slides from Sverrir Konradsson of Iceland's Transport Authority, and I'm delighted that Hilmar is chairing this conference today because he has been majorly involved in this. The Icelandic example demonstrates, in a nutshell, all the issues we've been trying to highlight, and indeed have been highlighting. And I note what the Minister or the Deputy Permanent Secretary said in his opening today about assistance from other nations as to what Thailand may wish to learn from. Well, this is the perfect example. And Iceland have supported the effort by the International Maritime Organization in every way and at every juncture. These incredible reductions in accidents are the result of extensive work by Iceland ever since Iceland started participating in the work of the International Maritime Organization in 1960. Iceland has a very strong culture of safety. The nation has thousands of crew members on ships, many of them living in small communities, and history has shown devastating effects on the whole community who, like so many other parts of the world, experience tragic deaths at sea. It touches the whole nation, and this is why the culture of safety, when turned in the right direction by a nation, is so strong. There are many reasons for the reduction in fatal accidents in Iceland. Basic safety training has been mandatory for 35 years, with refresher training at 5-year intervals for all professional seamen. Awareness-raising campaigns are regularly conducted through a long-term programme on the safety of seamen, and Iceland has conducted risk assessments to reduce the number of accidents on board vessels. And the work has resulted in a change of mindset and new approaches and the introduction of an ambitious safety culture. But all this started with Iceland's interaction with the International Maritime Organization and a very leading figure of the Iceland Maritime Administration, Mr. Hjalmar Bardsson. And he was a pioneer who was both instrumental in Iceland and in the IMO, both in developing regulations on fishing vessel safety, but transposing them into Icelandic legislation. In general, vessels are safer now than before, and new technology has also played its role, including the implementation of AIS as mandatory for all vessels of 6 meters in length and over in commercial use, and the continuous tackling of vessel traffic in real time by Iceland's vessel traffic system. Of essence is also, and according to Icelandic law, it's mandatory to register each crew member before going to sea in a centralized registration system, and each vessel is also surveyed every year and issued a certificate of seaworthiness. If there is an issue with the vessel, it is not allowed to go to sea until corrective actions have been made. And in addition, Iceland has a very strong culture with education and training for all concerned, including seamen, masters, ship owners, and even their families. Essential too is the weather and sea state information systems used in Iceland for voyage planning and preparing for sailing to the fishing grounds. And Iceland's strong efforts regarding increased safety on vessels has also seen the introduction of additional requirements. One of those is that inflatable life rafts were made mandatory on board all vessels, and automatic release mechanisms for inflatable life rafts was made mandatory. Many lives were lost previously because life rafts sank with the fishing vessel, and also carriage of emergency position beacons, EPIRBs, was made mandatory, which has saved many lives. I highlight Iceland because at every juncture of my work on these issues, they have been there to support the International Maritime Organization and others, as I have said. And this is not to say that there are not incidents in Iceland. There are, but the outcomes have been incredible because of training in a collaborative manner with all concerned. And in all this work, we have tried to explain that this is not just about fishing vessel safety and crew safety. That is critically important for us and for everyone in this room, but we have to raise this up the political ladder. And if the politicians do not care about fishermen, then maybe they do care about the environment or our rescue services. So to conclude, to give you an example, I will read you what I said at the last IMO webinar, the European one in January of this year. Having heard what the panelists have said, I said, I would like to repeat Minister Garandin's statement this morning. Minister Garandin was the French minister who addressed the webinar. This is about our collective responsibility towards seafarers on board these vessels, and it is also about the credibility of the states that have adopted this agreement. In other words, there is no use in turning up, signing international agreements, and then doing nothing about implementing them. We have, using a phrase widely used in my own country, Ireland, had enough fireside chats on the issue. 45 years is an awful long time to wait to implement a global fishing safety regime. It is clear from all our panelists and others at this webinar that political will is key here. And speaking as a proud Irishman and proud European citizen, I said, I would hope that after this webinar action will be taken and that we as individual citizens play our role in a collective on behalf of our respected nations so that we can live up to our shared goals of influencing moral good across this world, working with other nations who share our values. There are very important benefits in implementing the Cape Town Agreement that are not being realised. It is no longer an excuse to deprioritise this issue. It is clear that this worldwide fishing vessel safety convention will benefit our individual states through issues such as reduction in infiltration of illegal fish into our markets, monitoring of fish stocks as global warming changes them drastically, reduction in pollution of plastics from fishing vessels, and so many other issues. And what about our rescue services, where they have to go hundreds of miles to the rescue of a substandard international fishing vessel because we as nations have not fulfilled our international obligations? That in itself should be enough of a reason to ratify. And we have a duty as people to the rest of the world to help reduce ongoing, unnecessary, and utterly unacceptable misery of death. So we each need to ask ourselves as we leave this webinar, and indeed it applies here, and look in the mirror tonight, what can I as a good citizen do to help? Do I have the courage to send that email or pick up the phone to my department colleagues and those at the ministry, or to speak to the minister and put this issue on the agenda, and then not let it lie by seeking a response and sending a meeting diary invite? Do I have the courage to say, Minister, we are leaving our rescue services at unnecessary risk, in addition to our fishermen? Minister, do we not want the responsibility? Minister, we do not want the responsibility and repercussions as administrations on our watch if something tragic happens in having to respond unnecessarily to a substandard fishing vessel hundreds of miles from our coast, for example to the west of Ireland or elsewhere. And Minister, it would be unconscionable if something happens in such circumstances to the rescue services of the states who have ratified, when those countries have fulfilled their international obligations in ratifying the agreement. And the tragedy would have been prevented if this international regime was in place, but the tragedy happens because we have not stepped up to the mark in fulfilling our international obligations. That will be a hard burden to carry, Minister. So we have the power to make change by putting the extra effort in with strength of character and purpose, championing the issue and spending a few extra hours at work over the coming months to see it through. And I know many of you have already tried, but now is the time to do so again, armed with the information from this webinar. And I went on to say this: finally, in working with Croatia and Branimir Farkas, who is the head of Maritime Safety, in particular, a similar age to me, I was reminded of my younger days when there was utter tragedy in the Balkans, in Branimir's youth, and I could see in Croatia and the action they have taken, a nation that does not take the air we breathe and the wonderful freedoms we have for granted. They lost too much, and perhaps many of us are too distant now from the turmoil, and we need to be reminded. I saw how Branimir worked with his minister, Captain Orlic, and his ministerial assistant, Mr. Bulic, on this issue and made it happen. And like Croatia, we should always use our time during peace to do what we might not be able to do later. So now is our chance. Japan and South Korea are close, and their recent leadership, like Finland, Croatia and Portugal, is admirable. And it is our choice as individuals in choosing to influence our state's direction for such a noble cause for the world's fishers. And at the end of 2022, history will either look on us very favourably when we look in that mirror, or it will not, and the protection of our fishers and of our rescue services will be left in abeyance for decades. So that is what I said, and that applies here today, and that will hopefully give you an insight into the theme and work of the International Maritime Organization on these issues. We are very close. We must always have faith in humanity by finding good people like Koki from Japan, whose grandfather would be very proud of him. There are many of such people in this room today, in this wonderful country and region, and together we will always make a difference. And it's been my honor to speak here today. Thank you very much indeed.